Happy Friday. Welcome to the Liz Wheeler Show. We have a bombshell study from Yale University Medical School that we're going to talk about on the show today, but unfortunately, we can't talk about this study on YouTube, so you'll have to go to blazetv.com/Liz or Spotify if you prefer to listen to that, and I highly recommend that you do because this study is breathtaking. BlazeTV.com/Liz or go to Spotify to listen to that. You're not going to want to miss it. We're also going to talk about what's happening in Maine. Yes, Maine. It might seem just like a tiny state up in the Northeast, but actually, Maine is a little carbon copy of California. Some of the most radically leftist policies go first from California, then to Maine, before they are disseminated to blue states across the country. And what's happening in Maine? Donald Trump signed an executive order prohibiting biological men from playing in women's sports, and yet the governor of the state of Maine, a feminist by the name of Janet Mills, is defying President Trump's executive orders, and reportedly, Trump and Governor Mills at the White House got into a war of words about this. We are going to have a representative from the Maine State House join us on the show today to discuss what's happening up in Maine. Also, Kash Patel has been confirmed as FBI director. Thank you, Jesus. I think Kash Patel was the most likely to not get confirmed. He was the iffiest of passing by some of those squish Republicans, but thank goodness every single one of Trump's president or cabinet nominees has now been confirmed. He will convene his first cabinet meeting next Wednesday. We have a list of things for Kash Patel to do at the FBI during his first week as FBI director. And we have Mike Johnson. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, doesn't want you to get a check from Elon Musk and Donald Trump with a DOGE dividend. And I gotta say, Mike Johnson's reason for opposing a DOGE dividend being sent back to you, it is, after all, your taxpayer dollars that were wasted by bureaucrats in the federal government. His reason just doesn't quite cut it. Also, JD Vance at CPAC spoke in a way that I've never heard another politician speak about when it comes to his faith and what it means to him to live in a free nation, why he wants to live in a free nation, and what his vision is for our society. And believe it or not, he was unafraid to talk about his Christian belief and how that should order society. All that and more today on the Liz Wheeler Show. You know, in all the time that you and I have been alive, the US dollar has always been the primary currency. But that may not be the case much longer. The US dollar, thanks to Joe Biden, is facing unprecedented inflation, and our politics is getting increasingly unstable. Just listen to anything that any Democrat says on any given day for proof of that. And as if that wasn't scary enough, the government and the globalists, not just people in our own government, are looking to take control over you by taking control over your money. And they're going to do that with what they're calling a digital dollar. That's why it's never been more important than for you to take control over your wealth. Do not let your life savings become a casualty of failing banks or currency wars or controlling politicians. Now is the time to call the only precious metal dealer I trust, American Hartford Gold. They'll show you how to protect your savings, your retirement accounts by diversifying your wealth portfolio with physical gold and silver. My husband and I did this. A portion of our wealth portfolio is now in physical precious metals. American Hartford Gold is a great company. They support content like this that's committed to bringing you the truth. Tell them I sent you, and they'll give you up to $15,000 of free silver on your first order. Call them now. You can click the link in the description of this episode or call 866-996-5172. That's 866-996-5172, or text Liz to 998899. Again, the phone number is 866-996-5172, or text Liz to 998899. So now we turn to the state of Maine. Now, a couple weeks ago, right after President Trump took office, he issued an executive order that reclaimed the definition of what it means to be a woman. He reclaimed what the definition of sex discrimination is. This, of course, is the Title IX redefinition that the Biden administration had played around with, where they said sex discrimination doesn't just apply to discrimination against women or discrimination against men. They expanded the definition of sex to include gender identity. Because of that, biological men in schools across the country, and yes, this is happening in schools across the country, biological men were allowed to play on women's sports teams. Biological men were harming women. We showed this a couple months ago on the there was a college volleyball game in which a biological man who identified as a woman spiked the volleyball into the face of an actual female on a different team, and that female's face was broken. Well, that's not the only example of it. Riley Gaines, of course, lost to Leah Thomas, formerly known as Will Thomas, a man masquerading as a woman. And a United Nations report said that 900 medals in competitions around the world have been won by biological men pretending to be women in women's competitions. This is not only unsafe, it's unfair, and it completely rejects reality. Well, thank you to President Trump. He reclaimed the definition of what it means to be a woman, and biological men are no longer allowed to play in women's sports in America. And yet, in the state of Maine, which is governed by a far leftist feminist by the name of Janet Mills, she's the governor up there, Maine has defied President Trump's order. Now, in addition to that first order, simply reclaiming the definition of man and woman, President Trump specifically signed an order that said that states will face repercussions if they allow biological men to play women's sports, even if those biological men are pretending to be women. Maine is doing just that. Maine is defying President Trump and says that they will continue to allow biological men to play in women's sports. President Trump, however, had all of the governors to the White House yesterday and picked Janet Mills out of the crowd to address her directly, saying, do you really want this to happen? Do you want me to withhold federal funding from the state of Maine because you are allowing biological men to play in women's sports? The night before the governor's meeting, he had floated this idea publicly as a signal to Governor Mills to warn her what was about to happen to her state if she did not follow the law as signed by the chief executive. And this is what he said. Take a look.
I heard men are still playing in Maine. Is anybody here from Maine? Who is that? Is that the governor? Well, I hate to tell you this, but we're not going to give them any federal money. They are still saying we want men to play in women's sports, and I cannot believe that they're doing that. They are, let's find out who that guy is that raised his hand. Maybe he's just kidding. But, so we're not going to give them any federal funding, none whatsoever, until they clean that up.
We're not going to give them any federal funding. Well, according to Reuters, he spoke with the governors this morning. It was not yesterday. It was this morning. Let me correct that. And Donald Trump was talking to both Democrat and Republican governors at the White House, and he got into a war of words with Maine's Governor Janet Mills. He, of course, was talking about his executive order banning transgender identifying athletes in sports when she objected. And Trump responded to her by saying, you better do it because you're not going to get federal funding. According to Reuters, Mills responded with, we're going to follow the law, sir. We'll see you in court. And Trump reportedly shot back and said, enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be an elected official afterwards. So to discuss what's happening in the state of Maine, we are going to bring in a state representative from Auburn, a city in Maine, Representative Laurel Libby. Representative Libby, thank you for joining the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
All right. Well, it seems like there's some exciting times in Maine right now. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek because it's pretty obvious that men should not be allowed to play in women's sports. But Maine is an interesting political mashup. I described it earlier in the show as being a little tiny piece of California because it used to be a red state. In recent years, it's become very blue, especially in the Portland area and in cities. And many of the very radical leftist policies in California next actually go to Maine before going to other blue states around the country. So talk to me about your governor, Janet Mills. Talk to me about this defiance of President Trump's executive order on disallowing, I should say, men from playing in women's sports.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as soon as as President Trump issued his executive order, we heard feedback from the Maine Principals Association, who said, we are going to, in defiance of this executive order, we are going to continue to allow boys to play in girls' sports. And so, sure enough, this past Monday, a biological male participated in the Maine State Championship for indoor track and field and won first place in girls pole vaulting, displacing a Maine girl from winning that prize.
Which It's funny to me when the left looks at this and says that's not happening. Men who identify as girls aren't winning. Yes, they are in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities. This is in fact happening. So, I mean, tell me about your constituents. Tell me about what people think about this, because it seems to me that it does cross party lines, that parents and athletes, regardless of whether you vote Republican or Democrat, don't think this is fair. And yet you have the Principals Association in Maine, as well as the governor, wanting to take this really fringe position on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyday Mainers don't believe that boys belong in girls' sports. And that lines up with the rest of the country, right? 79% of people do not believe that boys should be participating in girls' sports. It's not fair. And so that's what I hear from Maine people. There is the fringe that thinks that this is acceptable, that it's okay for boys to be beating girls who've worked so hard, right? Think about all of the time and energy and effort that goes into excelling at your given sport, and to have that taken away from someone who shouldn't be participating. It's just not fair for Maine girls. And it's unfortunate that the folks who are in power in our state have determined that this is to be law in Maine. And that's where the federal government has to come in, has to step in and intervene and say this is not acceptable, because the powers that be in Maine won't protect girls.
And this is a pretty significant and appropriate, by the way, response from President Trump to say, okay, if you're going to defy not only reality, but if you're going to defy my executive order, you're not going to get federal assistance. What are your constituents telling you about that? Because that's also going to impact, it's not going to impact Janet Mills. She has, a cushy elitist life as a politician, but it will impact everyday Mainers.
Absolutely. I posted about this on Monday, and that kind of started off this whole brouhaha, right? And since then, I've been hearing from those Mainers. I've been hearing from girls who are being pushed aside in sports. I've been hearing from parents who are concerned about their kids. I've been hearing from grandparents who don't want to see girls pushed aside and silenced in this arena. And so that's who I'm hearing from here in Maine, constituents who care about fairness for Maine girls and ensuring that they have every opportunity before them, and that they have an even playing field instead of one that is so convoluted with allowing biological males to participate and to dominate in their fields.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's not only unfair, it's actually unsafe for these women as well if it's any kind of contact sport. Like I gave the example of the volleyball team. This just happened a couple months ago out in California. So what's the recourse here? The Maine Principals Association, as well as this threat to see you in court from Janet Mills. That's taxpayer money that will be funding that could be used for something else. But what's the Republican plan in Maine to hold Janet Mills accountable or to prevent this from harming Mainers?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are going to be bills coming before the legislature this session that Maine people can make their voices heard on to demand that biological males are not permitted to participate in female sports. So that is certainly an opportunity for folks to speak up loudly and clearly and make sure that the governor and the Democrat legislature hear them. And that's certainly one mechanism to fix this problem. But I really do think the solution is going to come from the federal government, whether that is challenged in court or not. I think that is, at the end of the day, the solution, because the Democrat majority isn't listening to Maine people. And so we need to let the dollar talk here.
Yeah, and something I often find interesting about elected representatives is some of them are ideological and some of them are just fearful of getting voted out of office. What are your colleagues like? Are they very much committed to the transgender ideology, or are they just worried, I kind of represent a leftist area, they're telling me that they want transgenderism. So even though I'm one of those 79% that don't really think that it's true, I got to do what these people say. Like, what are we dealing with in Maine?
Yeah, the Democrat majority is not a majority that really listens to Maine people. They're pretty committed to their ideology. And I don't think they have any understanding that this really is an 80-20 issue where they are just wrong, and that they're not listening to their constituents. They're not listening to the majority of Mainers who don't think it's right to allow boys to participate in girls' sports. I don't anticipate that they will listen, and that's why I say we've got this two-pronged approach, right? Mainers should make their voices heard on the coming legislation, but also I think the solution is going to be found via the federal government, because we do have a Democrat governor, we have a Democrat House and Senate majority, and they're not listening.
Yeah, and one of the things that Congressman Chip Roy told me, this was the end of last year. I had asked him, listen, when we make a lot of calls to your office and send a lot of emails and text and tag you on X, does that make a difference in how people vote? And he was like, yeah, thanks for putting me on the spot. Yes, that makes a difference in how elected representatives act, because they do fear losing their power, and they, rightly fear losing their seat in an election. And so one of the great things that we do on this show is when there's an issue like this, we make our voices heard in a very polite but very firm way. So if you are a resident of Maine, make sure you reach out to your elected representative. I don't care if they are the most radically leftist, transgender, ideology committed person. Reach out to them, email them, call them, text them, anything. Send them a letter. Tag them on X, on Instagram. Let them know that they are in the fringe minority, that it is an 80-20 issue, as Representative Libby says. And even if you're not in the state of Maine, listen, when federal funding is going from the federal government, which we all fund, and is going to a state, we also have a right to make our voices heard regardless of whether we live in that state. So make a little ruckus about this, because it does make a difference, especially when these Democrats are in the fringe. Representative Libby, thanks for being on the show. Keep us updated about this, because Maine is kind of a petri dish, I think, sometimes for how these leftist policies, or in this case, defiance of an executive order, how it's going to play out in other states. So we'll be watching interestedly. So keep us in the loop.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.
Of course, it was a pleasure to have you. All right, Kash Patel has been confirmed as FBI director. I got to tell you, Kash Patel it was a close call between who was going to be the most difficult to confirm, RFK Jr. or Kash Patel, but I kind of thought Kash Patel would face a more difficult time than RFK, but he was confirmed. He was confirmed by 51-49. That tells you all you need to know about the United States Congress. 51-49. We have a list of things today that Kash Patel should do in his first week as FBI director, and I want you to contribute to this segment too. So you're watching live right now. I want you to go to the live chat and let me know what you think Kash Patel should do in his first week. And I am going to read your suggestions, and we will send them along to Kash himself. Before we get to that, I do want to talk about ivermectin. Ivermectin's an interesting case study. I call it a playbook because what happened with ivermectin during COVID was not a one-time phenomenon. It was not tyranny isolated to one moment. It was a playbook that was written and practiced and will be applied to us again. What happened was ivermectin was found to have efficacy against the COVID-19 virus, but instead of the public health officials saying, yes, use ivermectin, it reduces the sickness when you contract COVID-19, they gaslit us. They said, no, it doesn't work. Even though we had family members and friends, tons of people, even studies done showing that it worked. They said, it doesn't work. It's a horse drug. It's a cow drug. Do not take it. And the reason they told us not to take it is because if they had admitted that ivermectin had efficacy against COVID-19, then they would not have gotten their emergency use authorization for the COVID-19 mRNA jab. You see how that works. So this is a playbook that's going to happen again. They're going to lie to us about some medication that we may need or want to use against some threat that we are facing. Whether it's another virus, aren't we supposed to be facing a quademic right now? Whether it's an emergency like the wildfires in California or the hurricanes in the Southeast, we need to have access to the right resources. That matters. That's why All Family Pharmacy offers over 200 different medications and bundled emergency packages to ensure that you are ready for anything. At the heart of their effort is the Make America Healthy Again movement. It's a call to take control of your health, prepare for the unexpected. Don't leave it to Dr. Fauci to take care of you. Check out allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. And because you are part of this movement, use code Liz10 at checkout for an exclusive discount. That's allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz, code Liz10. allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. Also, my husband and I quit our health insurance late last year. We just called up and said, listen, we're done. We're not going to be paying these premiums anymore. We don't want to be part of this corrupt system. It's not only confusing, it's expensive, and it's frustrating because it doesn't cover what you need it to cover. Claim denials, as you know, you've probably experienced this, are becoming more and more common. In fact, 1 in 5 Obamacare claims were denied just last year, and that is unacceptable. It's why Crowd Health is such an amazing alternative. I switched my entire family to Crowd Health after I called up the CEO and said, listen, this sounds pretty cool. Is it the real deal? Tell me how it works. Can you actually cover my family and help us pay for healthcare costs in the event of some kind of health event, even though you're not technically insurance? And he said, yeah, we can. You can compare how much we cost to your premium, your monthly healthcare premium at Crowd Health. It's just $175 per month for an individual, or $575 for a family, or 4 or more. And with that, you get access to a community of people who are willing and waiting to help you out in the event of an emergency. That means bills, telemedicine visits, discounted prescriptions, so much more. And that's all without doctors' networks getting in the way. You join the crowd. It's a group of members like you and like me and my family who want to help pay for each other's unexpected medical events. So let Crowd Health help with your healthcare needs. Get started today for just $99 per month for your first 3 months. Go to joincrowdhealth.com. Use promo code Liz. Crowd Health is not insurance. I personally call it assurance. Learn more at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code Liz. Okay, let me bring up the live chat here so that we can read all your comments. Kash Patel has been confirmed as FBI director. What are his top priorities? What should he be doing in his first week, once he walks through those storied doors at the Federal Bureau of Investigation? What is he going to do with his time? I have some suggestions. I know you have some suggestions. Let's start with the big picture here. The FBI should be abolished. The FBI should be raised from the ground up with only the necessary functions farmed out to agencies who are not corrupt. And maybe agencies that are not corrupt, maybe that's a big LOL. Because most federal government agencies are corrupt, at least until Elon Musk is getting his hand on them. But here are my suggestions for what Kash Patel should do. Number one, Kash Patel should investigate thoroughly what happened on January 6th and in the lead up to January 6th. A big part of this investigation, as you know, from Congressman Loudermilk and Congressman Massey's 2 reports, one on January 6th itself, one on the January 5th pipe bomber. The pipe bomber is a significant part of the January 6th story. This individual, whom we have only seen in a grainy video released by the DNC. There's no identifiable features on his face. It actually looks like someone used a blur tool to blur out any biometric data that we could recognize about this individual. This blurry video from the DNC shows an individual in a hoodie placing allegedly explosive devices outside of the DNC and the RNC. It wasn't actually outside the RNC. It was outside the Capitol Hill Club, which is adjacent to the RNC. It's where Republican members of Congress often go to hobnob. Outside of the Capitol Hill Club and outside of the DNC, we were told allegedly explosive devices were planted, and yet those devices, which were laid in plain sight, were not discovered for 16, 17 hours until the next day. They were discovered, coincidentally, if you believe in coincidences, within 15 minutes of each other, and within just moments of the first breach that happened outside of the Capitol. Now, do you believe in coincidences or do you not believe in coincidences? I'm not sure we should in the case of the pipe bomber, because the first alleged pipe bomb was found by what the media called a woman carrying a laundry basket going to do her laundry. But it wasn't just some random civilian woman who was out doing her laundry. It was a woman who works for an FBI, CIA, intel community adjacent organization, and her specialty is in, quote, combating disinformation, which is a fancy word for censoring us. Censoring us, you know, the way that they wanted to censor all of us outside of the Capitol on January 6th when we felt righteous indignation over the rigging of the 2020 presidential election. So you solve the mystery of who this pipe bomber is, and let's just say the FBI did originally investigate who this person was, and they used geofencing data, which is data that pings from everybody's cell phones up to the satellite. They narrowed it down to 186 different possible suspects, and from there, they narrowed it down to just one person. There was only one phone number, one cell phone that was pinging between the satellites that could have realistically been this individual that placed these pipe bombs. So they figured it out. So why don't we know who this person is? Well, suddenly the FBI stopped investigating the pipe bomber. Why? Why did the FBI suddenly stop investigating the pipe bomber? Well, I think the answer to that would unravel the entire mystery of what happened on January 6th, unravel the entire mystery of what I call the Fedsurrection, because we know that there were undercover feds from various agencies involved in what happened on January 6th. We know that for a fact. Congressman Loudermilk and Congressman Massey's report revealed that there were at least 24 undercover agents from the FBI alone, and that doesn't even include the other agencies. That's just the FBI. There were 24 undercover, and what did they do? And why weren't they prosecuted for the wrongdoings they committed? Well, you uncover that, and you uncover essentially the nexus of the swampy effort to get you and get President Trump. But President Trump, of course, is simply standing between us and the swamp. So that should be the first order of business for Kash Patel, is investigate thoroughly to its completion January 6th and the January 5th pipe bomber. He should also investigate Dr. Fauci and Big Pharma. And I know Joe Biden issued a preemptive pardon of Dr. Fauci. You know, coincidentally, that pardon started in 2014, right at the time that Dr. Fauci started engaging in illegal gain-of-function experiments that, yes, led to the funding and production, creation even, of the COVID-19 virus in that Wuhan Institute of Virology. I don't care if Dr. Fauci was issued a pardon by Joe Biden. We, the American people, still deserve to know the truth. Even if he is pardoned from having to serve a prison sentence, investigate him so that we have some accountability. That's the second thing Kash Patel should do. He should also go on an absolute declassification spree. I don't know if you guys ever saw the episode that Glenn Beck did with Kash Patel. I think it was from early last year. And they were sitting in Glenn's office, and Glenn asked him about the Epstein files. And he asked him about the JFK files. And Kash Patel sat there for a moment. And then he said to Glenn, I've seen them. He said, you're talking to a man who's seen the redacted part of the 9/11 report and the unreleased portion of the JFK files. And Glenn said, and Kash Patel did not reveal publicly what he knew about those files. But now, as FBI director, he has the access and the authority to declassify the Epstein files, the Diddy files, the JFK files, the 9/11 report, and he should. Those three things are the things Kash Patel should do in his first week in office. He should also, by the way, release the unredacted affidavit that the FBI used. It's the information the FBI used as their probable cause when they were petitioning a judge for permission to raid the Project Veritas journalists who themselves were investigating the Ashley Biden diaries. Pre-dawn raids. FBI agents bashing down the doors of journalists, stealing their phones and their computers, violating privileged First Amendment right to the free press. Years of threats of investigation. They were under investigation for years. It was only 2 weeks ago that this case was finally closed and no charges were filed. But when these journalists from Project Veritas, Spencer Meads, James O'Keefe, Eric Cochran, requested the affidavit, what was the probable cause that allowed the FBI to raid our homes in this way? They were given the affidavit and it was blacked out line by line by line, dozens and dozens of pages. What does it say? Kash Patel should release the unredacted affidavit that was supposedly the probable cause that allowed the FBI to raid these journalists. If we do not see the unredacted affidavit, then a precedent has been set that federal law enforcement can violate the First Amendment right of journalists and get away with it. Get away with it. On that note, by the way, Pam Bondi, the sitting attorney general, just said that the Epstein client list and the JFK files and the MLK files, Martin Luther King Jr. files, are currently on her desk. Here's what she had to say. Take a look.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that. I'm reviewing JFK files, MLK files. That's all in the process of being reviewed because that was done at the directive of the president from all of these agencies.
So have you seen anything that you said, oh my gosh?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, we'll check back with you.
Not yet. Well, let's see them. Something tells me that not yet will be suspended the minute the American people get their hands on this information. Kash Patel, Pam Bondi should do all of this and more. They should also investigate not just investigate, they should fire every FBI agent at every level who was involved in Crossfire Hurricane, who was involved in the entrapment of General Michael Flynn during the first Trump administration. If I were Kash Patel, I would fire everybody at the FBI and let them apply to be rehired. They should investigate Adam Schiff for the law breaking that he engaged in. They should investigate Liz Cheney. Kash Patel has a lifetime of work to do in the next 4 years. And again, thank the dear Lord that he was confirmed. And I hope that Kash Patel's tenure as FBI agent reflects President Trump's mantra for this first month in office: shock and all. Event after event, action after action, reform after reform, one on top of the other, because that is exactly how deeply entrenched the swamp is in the FBI. So with the confirmation of Kash Patel, that means that President Trump's entire cabinet has been confirmed. Everyone, we did it. They're confirmed. President Trump will convene his first cabinet meeting next Wednesday, so just a couple of days from now. And won't that be a sight to behold, to see all of these individuals who are there to drain the swamp, who got confirmed against all odds because every radical leftist in Washington, D.C. had it out for them, and every mainstream media outlet was doing their utmost to undermine the nominations, to see them all in one room advising the president in this effort, this great effort to make America great again. We will be covering that on the show next week. JD Vance was at CPAC this week and reflected on the gospel. And I don't think I've ever heard a politician say with a sincerity that JD Vance articulated the point of the gospel, the point of religion, the way that he did on the stage in front of the entire world. Take a look at this.
First is, I believe, like, the fundamental tenet of the Christian faith. It's not just a set of good moral principles, though it is that. I think the fundamental tenet of our faith is that the Son of God became man, he died, and then he raised himself from the dead. That is the fundamental tenet of the Christian faith, and I think so much flows from that. And I think one lesson that flows from that is that we shouldn't fear death. Of course, death is a very bad thing, but there are much more terrible things than just losing one's life, and importantly, you could lose one's soul. And I think whether it's fighting for the unborn or fighting for peace and security for our citizens, I want us to be the kind of society where my kids can grow up to be virtuous young people, can be good young Christians, of course, because that's what I'm trying to raise them to be. And that's what our public policy is trying to do. Creating the space where moms and dads can raise their children in their faith to become good young people who believe the things that I do. That is what I'm trying to create, is the space for you, of course, to raise your children as you see fit, but the space for me to raise my kids to be the kind of young people that I think they ought to be.
The number one thing that we should do at this moment is say a prayer for JD Vance, because no other politician, no president, no vice president, no member of the United States Senate or the House of Representatives has ever articulated what JD Vance just articulated. That not only is he a Christian and a Catholic, not only does he fear the loss of his soul more than he fears the loss of his life, but he wants our society to reflect that. He wants our society not just to be a libertarian license to do what you want without government getting in your way, but he wants our society to be properly ordered. And ordered to what? What does that mean to be properly ordered? It means ordered along natural law. It means ordered with the along the lines of recognizing or acknowledging that God is the author of creation. God is the author of us. God is the author of everything, and that our purpose on this earth is to know God, to serve God, and to love God, and that our government, liberty is not the ends. Liberty is the means to be able to do that. I don't think we've ever had a politician who has articulated what JD Vance just articulated at CPAC. And so I ask you to join me in saying a prayer for the protection of JD Vance, both physically and spiritually, because when you have a politician that speaks so articulately for Christ, you can bet your bottom dollar that they are going to be attacked in some way for articulating that. All right, Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Now, you know that I don't like Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Not personally. I don't know him personally. I'm talking politically. I think he's weak. I think he is a squish. I think he is an establishment rhino. And I say this not because I'm interested in hurling ad hominem attacks at him, but because I looked at his record. I watch his behavior, and he's weak. He is a weak man. And I don't respect that. I don't want a weak man to be Speaker of the House. And he demonstrated this to us again, just the depth of his political weakness. After Elon Musk and Donald Trump had suggested that the taxpayer money that Elon Musk has discovered through doging these federal agencies, that these billions and billions of dollars shouldn't just be given back to the government, but should actually be given back to the American people, since it's our money to begin with. The Elon Musk and Donald Trump are calling it a DOGE dividend, and they're publicly discussing this idea that they might actually return it, give a check for thousands of dollars back to the Americans, since it was the American people who had this money stolen from them and abused by our politicians. Speaker Johnson, however, responded to Elon Musk and Donald Trump and their idea of returning this DOGE dividend to the American people, and he said that he's against it. And this is why. Take a listen.
The president said that a percentage of DOGE savings could maybe go back to the American people in the form of what he called DOGE stimulus checks, something like 20%. How would that work?
Well, look, I mean, politically, that would be great for us, you know, you send everybody a check, but really, we have to think of it, I think, in a...
That just got everybody's attention, by the way.
I know.
I just saw everybody look up all of a sudden.
I know.
Yep.
But if you think about our core principles, right, fiscal responsibility is what we do as conservatives. That's our brand. And we have a $36 trillion federal debt. We have a giant deficit that we're contending with. I think we need to pay down the credit card, right? That's what I think we need to do.
He opposes it on principle. On principle. Fiscal conservatism is our brand. He said, no, it's not your brand, because you and many of your colleagues have been in Congress for decades now, and you haven't done anything to stop the spending. You have not done anything to pay down the debt and the deficit. All you've done is make it worse. So now Elon Musk comes in with DOGE at the behest of President Trump, and he's actually doing something more actually effectively to practice fiscal conservatism than anything you've ever done. So I ask you to compare this. You compare the federal government. Yeah, we do have a lot of debt. We do have this deficit, and that's not good. But the American people have prices that they're facing, whether it's healthcare costs or the cost of eggs at the grocery store or housing, and it's almost unaffordable to live. You have gas prices, thanks to President Biden. You had, the cost of groceries. You have everything, just this humongous inflation. We are struggling to make ends meet because the money that was taken from us by the government in the form of taxes has been wasted. So it's not really a matter of, well, I get to choose to use the money to pay down my bad spending. No, you return the money to the people that you took it from because you used the money irresponsibly. It's a silly reason to oppose something. What Speaker Johnson articulated. You should oppose something if the cons of that thing in the short term and long term outweigh the benefits. And that certainly would not apply here. This is the definition of what it means to be Republican establishment. He actually is not thinking about the American people. He doesn't care about the struggles of the American people. He wants to keep the money for himself. He wants the US government to keep the money for itself, even though the money rightfully belongs to you. It's our money. You don't get to spend it to pay down the debt when you fraudulently took it from us. As I said, Speaker Johnson is not America first. I know the Trump administration has tried to bring him into the fold, but perhaps I would suggest that's because if you have a United States Congress where you're not going to get the speaker that you want because there's too many squishes to elect a base speaker, then you make do with a weak speaker that you can at least control to a certain extent. That would be my analysis of Speaker Johnson. And my analysis of a DOGE dividend, this would be huge for the American people. And yeah, it would be good politically for Donald Trump. Of course it would. I tell this story that, towards the end of the pandemic, when I started being able to travel for work again, I would often have drivers, Uber drivers who maybe weren't your stereotypical Republican. And I would ask them about politics. We just chat during the drive. And I'd say hey, yeah, you think Joe Biden's doing a good job? And they'd be like, no, I don't think Joe Biden's doing a good job, but they'd maybe be afraid to say it. So I was like, well, what about Trump? You maybe want to vote for Trump the next time. And they'd be like, oh, I don't know about Trump. And I would then say, well, surely there's something about Trump that you like. And more often than not, these individuals, once they could bring themselves to answer that question, would say, well, I did like how he helped us out with those COVID checks when the government shut down our businesses, when we faced the COVID lockdowns. It resonates with the American people when it feels like a government official is helping them, especially when Americans are facing, whether it's their businesses being shut down and, not being able to work, or whether it's facing inflation and prices that make living, caring for your family, supporting yourself, buying groceries, whatever it might be, make it feel like a humongous burden on your shoulder. When a politician can remove some of that burden, it makes a big, big difference. Speaker Johnson doesn't seem to get that. All right, we have many other topics to discuss, but we are out of time for today. Make sure you go to blazetv.com/Liz or Spotify if you prefer to watch the beginning of this episode, which we were unable to post on YouTube for reasons that you will understand once you watch the beginning of that episode. Highly recommend that you go and watch that. Also, we will include all the information that you need about the topic that we discussed at the top of the show on blazetv.com/Liz and on Spotify in our newsletter this week. So make sure you sign up at lizwheelernewsletter.com. That is lizwheelernewsletter.com. Thank you for watching today. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.